as a fellow commissioner, clearly. Welcome, Senator Nilo. Jose Atila Hernandez has joined us. Is that a cashmere hoodie you got there, Jose? Looks good. Looks good, my friend. So let's get started. This is the Little Hoover Commission hearing on data centers and California electricity policy, part one. So my name is Pedro Nava. I'm chair of the Little Hoover Commission. I want to thank you all for joining us today. We have other commissioners who are with us. We've got Vice Chair Anthony Cannella. We will be joined, I understand, by Commissioner Dion Aroner. David Beyer is here, Gil Garcetti, Jose Atila Hernandez, as well as Senator Roger Nilo. Also with us today are members of the commission staff. Executive Director Ethan Rarick, Deputy Executive Director Tamar Foster, Project Managers Crystal Beckham, Daniel Harris McCoy, as well as analyst Sharon McAllister, Gibran Maciel, and we have a new name, Jenna Waite. And I understand, Ethan, that we have warned Jenna that she may be asked to say hello.
We have, Mr. Chairman. Jenna joined us recently as the research analyst replacing Ashley Hurley. She will be assisting in a variety of research tasks. She comes directly from the legislature. And beyond that, I'll let Jenna introduce herself.
Hello, Jenna. There you are.
Hello. Nice to meet everybody. I come from the legislature. That was where I spent my last 3 years. Before that, I did opposition research. And before that, I did an AmeriCorps program. So been doing some different things with agriculture to politics to everything like that. So that's my background. Thank you.
And we might mention, Mr. Chairman, she is a Berkeley grad, so several commissioners I know are Cal fans. So.
Yeah, I saw a thumb up there just a second ago. Welcome, Jenna. Welcome.
Go Bears.
Yeah, I was waiting for that. All right, we got to do a little bit of housekeeping. We're live streaming today's hearing on Zoom. We'll have a public comment session at the end of the hearing. Commissioners' audio and video will remain on throughout the hearing. Commissioners, you may mute yourself if you wish. The video and audio of our hearing witnesses will be turned on when it's their opportunity. Members of the public joining us online are muted during this hearing. If you want to make a public comment, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom by clicking on the hand icon to join the comment queue. Those joining by phone can dial #9 to raise their hand, or you can email us at littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov. Please include the phone number you're using to join the meeting so that staff can identify and unmute you. Staff will be monitoring raised hands and comment requests throughout the hearing. If you're present at our in-person location and you'd like to comment, please notify one of the staff members. As usual, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. We are recording this hearing. Afterwards, a permanent link to the video will be posted on our website and uploaded to the YouTube channel. Now to the substance of today's hearing. This is the first in a series of commission hearings examining data centers and California electricity policy. I think it's probably wise to say at this point, we're likely to talk about other things besides just the electricity policy, because there's a lot more to this than just sending electrons to the facilities. This study builds on the Commission's recent work on artificial intelligence and its report on California's high electricity prices. Data centers are essential to modern digital infrastructure and the growth of artificial intelligence, yet they consume extraordinary amounts of power and require substantial new investments in the electricity grid. And while the primary focus of the Little Hoover Commission study at present is limited to the cost of electricity, there are potentially significant environmental concerns and those related to water that will need to be examined, whether it's by us or by someone else. I leave that open to further discussion. Determining how to meet this demand in ways that foster innovation in California while protecting the state's clean energy goals and avoiding further cost pressures on residents presents a major challenge for policymakers. Today, we will hear from representatives of California's ratepayers, academic experts focused on integrating data centers into the grid, environmental justice leaders, and regulatory specialists. Their testimony will provide a foundation for understanding the core issues at stake. Next month, we'll hold a follow-up hearing with representatives from California's utilities, regulatory agencies, and the technology sector. I want to thank Commissioners Beyer and Hernandez for their leadership of this study subcommittee. This hearing was organized by Project Manager Daniel Harris McCoy, and I'll now invite him to introduce our first witness.
Thank you, Chair Nava. Elise Torres is the Energy Team Assistant Managing Attorney at the Utility Reform Network, where she represents residential ratepayers in a variety of electricity and gas-related matters at the California Public Utilities Commission. Ms. Torres previously worked at the CPUC's Office of Ratepayer Advocates and as an attorney for the California Department of Insurance. She received her bachelor's in science in city planning from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and her law degree from UC Law San Francisco. Ms. Torres, you may begin your testimony.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Elise Torres. I guess I'm not a staff attorney anymore. I'm the assistant managing attorney of the energy team at TURN, or the Utility Reform Network, which is a nonprofit that advocates on behalf of ratepayers, particularly residential ratepayers, in energy regulatory proceedings at the Public Utilities Commission. And we've been doing this for over 50 years. I have not been doing this for 50 years. I've been doing this for about 12 years, and I work on a wide variety of issues at the CPUC, general rate cases, electric vehicle charging proceedings, net energy metering. And one of my new proceedings has been PG&E's Rule 30 tariff, which is an interconnection rule for large load customers, primarily data centers. And I'm going to focus on the risk of electricity rate increases due to data centers, because that's the focus of my work. But I don't want to downplay the potential negative grid reliability or environmental impacts from data centers, but I assume some of the other presenters will speak to that today. So I'm going to be talking about the risk of rate increases primarily.
Yeah, Ms. Torres, I neglected to inform the witnesses that it's been our experience at the commission that any material that was provided ahead of time has been read by the commissioners. And in all likelihood, you will be interrupted during your presentation. So please don't take offense. It is actually a compliment, meaning that the commissioners have already sort of figured out questions they'd like to ask you to expand on the material that you've submitted. So if you hear me going, excuse me, there's a good reason for it.
No problem. It'd be great to spare us all from me reading these slides. I know they're very dense, so apologies in advance for that. And we can move to the next one. So there's a lot of talk about the impact of data centers on electricity rates. You've probably heard a lot of utilities talking about the potential benefits to ratepayers, which certainly there's the potential, but we're at TURN really concerned about the potential for rate increases, particularly because there's just such a big increase in load, and that load is going to require a lot of new infrastructure investment. And all of that investment will be capital spending that will go into the utilities rate base and will be paid for by all customers for the entire life of the infrastructure. For transmission infrastructure, that's 30 to 50 years that we'll be paying for that, and also paying the utilities, if they're investor-owned utilities, a rate of return on. So that's one of the reasons TURN is concerned. And today I'm going to talk a lot about PG&E because I've been working on their application at the CPUC, and because here in California, they seem to be at least the epicenter of data center demand for the investor-owned utilities. There are some municipal utilities that also have a large data center load. So here, PG&E is forecasting data center demand of over 10 gigawatts or up to 10 gigawatts over the next couple years. And that's enough to power 7.5 million homes. And in 2024, they served a load of 11.3 megawatts. So it's an 85% increase. I see a hand up.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Thank you. Commissioner Beyer.
Thank you, Chair Nava, and thank you to the witness and also to the staff for an excellent briefing memo in advance. Frankly, the reason for interrupting is to try and lay out in the beginning some metes and bounds of the commission's jurisdiction, at least how I see it, which is we're a state commission. We're not designed to offer recommendations to Congress or to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We're not supposed to supplant the work done either by local governments or to put ourselves in the position of various stakeholders, whether it's utilities or tech companies. Rather, we're supposed to make recommendations that have salience for the legislature and the governor. And in order to do that effectively, I think we need to have a common set of factual understandings and then maybe a focus, particularly for this hearing and this subject. And so my first set of questions really relate to scope and try to dimensionalize the size or scale of data centers. That is currently, if I correct about this, they represent about 2.6% of demand, and that by 2030, that number could go up by 2 or 3 times. And part of the question is where those data centers are going to be located. So if you could help us with that, it would be useful because, as I understand it, data centers are currently located in territories of investor-owned utilities and municipal power providers. And what I'm trying to get a sense of is if we just look at PG&E, are we getting a complete picture of data centers in California, or whether we're just getting an example of somebody who's been approached to facilitate the construction and transmission from data centers for their territory. So maybe you could start with that.
Sure. And I'll speak to it as much as I can. I've, included a tidbit about SCE, Southern California Edison, which is an LA-based investor-owned utility. They're expecting 100 megawatts of data center load, possibly up to 500 megawatts. So significantly less than PG&E. The other investor-owned electric utility in the state, SDG&E, I have not heard much about on the data center front. I do know Silicon Valley Power, a municipal utility in Silicon Valley, Santa Clara County, is a huge data center area. I don't know their stats off the top of my head, but I know a significant amount of their recent load growth has been due to data centers, and they're really grappling with these issues. I do, based off my experience so far, think PG&E is going to be the investor-owned utility with the most growth, just because they consider the San Francisco Bay Area to be one of 8 primary data center markets in the United States. Given its proximity to Silicon Valley, the fiber network they have, and California's clean energy supply. So I think, it will be spread around. And certainly there's lots of other states that are having, a concentration of data centers. But I do think the San Francisco Bay Area will be one of the areas where there's a lot of data center development. And as far as PG&E's territory goes, I know most of the data center requests they're getting right now are in Santa Clara County, a few in some of the neighboring counties. And I think they've had a few down in the valley as well. But really, it is being clustered in that one area. And the clustering is one of the reasons that, there's so many impacts, because you have to upgrade, the grid in that area so much and add so much new infrastructure when you're having such a large growth of load in one area. So the clustering is part of the impact.
So, but just to be clear, the market for data centers is, at least presently, terrestrial. In other words, we're not talking about outer space, but we are talking about the entire globe. And the United States has, I believe, 51% of the data centers in the world. And there's competition between states about whether to offer incentives, permitting, or tax, or employment benefits. So part of the question that we're facing is, what's the magnitude of the potential California market? And what's the balance between the desirability of having data centers for other goals, whether it's to bolster clean energy or to obtain efficiencies that are claimed by utilities versus the costs. And so have you done any projections about how much data center growth is likely or projected in California relative to the rest of the United States market?
I have not. No, my work is all CPUC focused, investor and utility focused, but I'm guessing some of the other panelists who have a broader focus will be able to answer those questions.
Okay. And lastly, could you help us understand what mechanisms you believe are the most effective in protecting ratepayers? And I know you're going to go into Rule 30, which deals with type 1, 2, and 3 activities. But I guess what I'm asking a more general, broader question. Some other states like Oregon have passed laws requiring either long contracts or mandatory use of electricity, methods for dealing with stranded assets, things like that. Do you have a view about what we should be looking for in your presentation that deals with the question of protecting ratepayers from rate increases?
Yeah, I have a slide about solutions towards the end, but we could jump to.
Okay, we can wait. Okay,
Or
thank
if
you.
want to wait. Yeah. And I see
Yeah,
another hand up.
Yeah, Ms. Torres got Commissioner Hernandez has his hand up. Oh, you're muted. Jose, you're muted.
I was gonna say thank you. No, I've had the pleasure of working with Turn for 28 years, and I know Turn goes deep into rate structure, CPUC, and so I think that the last question, Commissioner Byer, is where probably we'll get some great answers in terms of kind of what should we be looking at to kind of protect consumers. I'd go a little deeper too. I mean, in terms of how can we ensure that data centers lower rates? I mean, one thing that you maybe you expand on. I mean, data centers also pay for transmission and distribution. And if they're paying their equivalent share, I mean, shouldn't that offset some of that infrastructure cost? So it'd be good to find out how can we build a system that has data centers and we maximize their usage to offset distribution and transmission costs and in essence lower rates.
Yes, Turn would love to see them lowering rates. And of course, in theory, the more kilowatt hours we're spreading fixed cost across, the lower rates we'll get. The question with data centers is how much investment do we have to spend to get, their load online? And so I have, a stat here. PG&E's estimated between $500 million and $1.6 billion in grid and generation capital investment to support each gigawatt of data center load. And from what I've been seeing in Rule 30, they've got costs of $95 million per data center interconnection, and those are usually around 80 to 90 megawatts. So I think the costs will probably be more in the 1 billion range per gigawatt, based off, today's pricing. There are issues, right, with data centers driving up generation costs just because of this huge demand and us not having necessarily enough to support the demand. So we're going to have to build new resources. There's also supply chain cost impacts of, we need a bunch of new transformers. Well, that might drive up the cost of transformers, that kind of thing. But we can go ahead and move to the next slide quickly. I just wanted to show, how much electric rates have gone up in the past decade. And really what the concern Turn has is that these cost increases have mainly been driven due to a growth in rate base. And so all of this data center spending, infrastructure spending will contribute to rate base growth. And so that's why Turn is concerned. We can go ahead and move to the next slide to keep things going. And yeah, I'm glad you brought up the point of them paying into the transmission and distribution system. That is one of the problems is that data centers want to connect at the transmission level. So they really won't pay distribution rates. And distribution rates are where we're collecting a lot of our societal costs. That's where all of PG&E's wildfire grid hardening spending is going. Also, wildfire recovery costs get funded through that. So there's a concern with data centers not paying distribution rates. And so I have an example here, the transmission rate the total rate they'll pay is 23 cents right now as proposed. compared to, a residential rate of 44 cents per kilowatt hour.
Commissioner Hernandez again.
Just, I mean, this is where we come in because you say they want to. And so, of course, I mean, you want to be behind the meter and then not pay anything to distribution transmission. But so maybe expand on that in terms of they want to, so they pay local rates. But if they do that, then the cost of the infrastructure will be borne by residential commercial customers.
Well, it's all transmission infrastructure to support them if they're connecting right at the transmission level, which is what the PG&E Rule 30 application is about. And that's why we think we need a broader rate design proceeding so we can have an actual like customer class for data centers, and then we can more accurately capture all of their costs and then, allocate their costs through their rate more fairly. I see
Mr. Byer.
a hand up.
Yeah, thank you. This is kind of a dumb guy question, but I'm trying to understand in lay terms, transmission and distribution. Would it be accurate to say transmission is something akin to the interstate highway system and distribution is local streets? Is that a good analogy?
That's a good analogy. I haven't heard that one, but it's a good one. Transmission is very high voltage. Those are the big, huge towers you see often along highways. And then distribution are more the smaller power lines in your neighborhood or, in the city.
Okay. And so if you're looking at this from a AI data center owner, whether it's a tech company or a private equity owner or a debt holder, they don't really care about the residential part, the local streets, because they're not getting any benefit out of that, or at least that's what their claim will be. And they want to pay a fair share for the superhighways that they're using. So how do you propose that dilemma get resolved? In other words, what's fair and how do we do this in a way so that it's not a null set. There are no new data centers because it's too expensive in California and they go elsewhere, which tends to drive other ancillary tech services, call it fiber optics or headquarters or a whole bunch of research going to other states. So how do you balance out the reality that paying for the local streets can't just be ratepayers, but it's not given on a arbitrary basis as a cost to the people who are creating the data centers? How do you propose to deal with that?
Well, one of the problems is this is just how rates have been designed in California for years, is that we collect societal costs unrelated to customer behavior, unrelated to how much electricity you use through distribution rates, because that was one of the broadest categories of rates. So that's why we think we need a rate schedule specific for data centers that captures a portion of those costs because they get them, right? They benefit from being connected to our grid.
My question is, what are the principles we should apply in figuring that new formula out? Obviously, the Public Utility Commission made an attempt, which frankly is favorable to the data centers by permitting them to pay up front and recoup over time so that they can get power faster. I get that, but that doesn't seem to help consumers particularly. And so the question is, what legislative criteria should there be to assure data center participation in a way that mitigates cost increases?
So the solution I think you're talking about is Rule 30, which is still pending before the commission. And that is really just an interconnection contract terms. That is not a rate schedule or a rate design specific for data centers. And so what we need is for the CPUC, which they've said they're going to do, but they haven't opened a proceeding to do, is to start a proceeding where they actually look at the costs caused by data centers and then allocate them more fairly to the data centers through their transmission rates. And then there's other rates that we all pay on our electricity bills that are called public purpose program charges, or the PPP. So figuring out how to allocate costs to them through that rate component and a few other non-bypassable charge components. So really what we just need is there's no class for this large of a customer right now. Right now we have the industrial class, which is for 1 megawatt or higher. These are 80, 90, 100 megawatts, just incredibly, just a different scale. So we need a rate that's designed for these customers and that considers that they're connecting straight into the transmission grid and bypassing the distribution grid.
Thank you.
I see Vice Chair Canella, and then I have a question.
Yes, thank you. Are there other entities or industries that connect directly to the transmission grid and bypass the distribution?
There are some, not many, but there are some like oil refineries, really heavy, large users, heavy industry, large users. I think some sort of manufacturing, some of those do as well.
Okay, and they would pay the lower cost as well if they're connected directly to the transmission grid?
Yes, right now they're all served through the same rate from PG&E at least. It's called B20T. It's a transmission-only rate, and that's what they've been paying. The issue is just that their load is much smaller, so they don't necessarily cause as many transmission upgrades and infrastructure upgrades as, the scale of a data center. I should have included it, but I think, they're like 10 megawatts an oil refinery, that kind of a load. So it's really, just a different scale from these hyperscaler data centers that just have really large loads.
Okay, and part of your concern is that for all the kind of societal goods that we've determined were necessary in the state, those are only charged on to distribution. So I, as a ratepayer, will pay those in addition to the cost of the distribution. That's just the location they decided to tack those on.
That's where they're, parked, because most of them are, distribution spending. Most of the wildfire mitigation work happens on the distribution system. There's all kinds of other costs that are being collected through distribution rates.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, look, that was Vice Chair Canella actually asked the question I was going to ask, which is, there's other industries that this industrial class that pays the transmission rate. So what's the situation with the data centers is there's no different box to check with respect to the Rule 30 that would distinguish data centers from oil refinery operations, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what the PUC needs to do, and I think you just said this, and I'm repeating it because it makes me sound smart, is what the PUC needs to do is to come up with a category, and this is what I think Beyer was also saying, that you could legitimately and intellectually apply to the data centers in order to justify charging them a different rate from an oil refinery.
Yes.
Okay.
And we can jump ahead. It's slide 7 to whoever's helping me here and just talk about the solutions, because I think that's the most important part. And so, what I was saying, we need a data center specific tariff or rate schedule for these customers. So the Rule 30 type contract, that's important too. We need binding contract terms, but we also need a rate that collects a reasonable share of the costs related to all kinds of societal benefits. We also need to consider, their impact on the grid. So Turn thinks, demand response program participation would be really useful for this type of large load. And also we're concerned about, their generation, and we want to make sure they're served by as much clean energy as we can get. So we think there should be some kind of carbon energy requirements as part of that cost category. And I put in here the Oregon House Bill 3546 that passed last year. I think that's a pretty good example. You might be aware of SB 57, which was in the California legislature this year and started out as, a data center rate schedule bill, but was eventually completely gutted and changed into a data center cost reporting and tracking bill. But I think the original, maybe not the original, but one of the early versions of SB 57 was a good starting point as well. But that's not what we have right now. So legislation would be great, or the commission certainly on its own accord could open a rulemaking where they decide that they're going to create a rate class for data centers. It was actually an issue that was raised in PG&E, the rate design phase of PG&E's current GRC, and the commission decided not to include it within the scope, saying that they are going to open a rulemaking that's more statewide, which makes sense. PG&E is not the only utility, so it does make sense to have a statewide approach. But that was months ago, and nothing's happened, at least so far.
Yep, makes sense. I also think part of this, and I'll get to you, Commissioner Hernandez, part of the, the reality of it is the extraordinary amount of money that is being spent by the industry to lobby legislators, both to discourage content regulation with respect to AI, as well as just discouraging these sorts of efforts to what I think would be equitably distribute the costs that are a result from the increased demand. Commissioner Hernandez.
So I know we have very smart people at CAISO, CEC, CPUC. So we know where there are some constraints in infrastructure. Would it be beneficial to actually say, here are areas in California where we wouldn't have a massive investment in infrastructure, where we could have some data centers?
That would be certainly beneficial. There's definitely places that on the grid where they would, require less upgrades than others. Unfortunately, with their size, they're going to require some new infrastructure, especially like on, I think it's slide 6, I have, the different facility types. The 1 through 3, they're almost always going to require. It's really the facility type 4 that's a question of, how much grid capacity there is. And the other problem is, like I said at the beginning, the clustering is really problematic for the grid. So having, all these 100-megawatt data centers in one area, one part of the transmission system is driving the need for, significant infrastructure upgrades.
And just added to that, Senator Becker, very smart, Chair of Energy, he's delved into this. I know he'll be on maybe next time. He's talking about data centers and load shifts. That if you use load shifts, that might be something we look at to bring down costs. Can you just quickly explain that for the commissioners?
Sure, I can try. It's pretty complicated, but I'll give you my best bet or my best shot. So one option is demand response participation. So we already have a demand response program for industrial customers, and pretty much it's when the grid is running at its peak, it's a hot day, everybody's using their AC, we're at the risk of a brownout. We ask you, current industrial users to either curtail their load, stop work for a couple hours, or, significantly scale down their work so that they, can shed load and the grid can keep operating. I know data centers like to say they're not very flexible, which I understand, but I do think, especially for the AI training models, there are times when they could, maybe don't train your model between 4 and 9 on one of the hottest days of the year. And we'll give you, a rate benefit for doing that, for participating in the demand response program. The problem right now is we don't have a demand response program designed for this large of a customer. But it's definitely something that we need to be looking into. I think they can also put in on-site battery storage so that they could shift to that during those peak times and, then not impact the grid. Most of them already have, they have really high reliability needs. So they usually have diesel generators in most cases right now, which obviously have air quality impacts. So I think incentivizing battery storage, especially if it could be dispatchable by the utility, would be a win for everybody and benefit the whole grid. I see a hand up.
Yep. Commissioner Byer.
Yeah. Switching topics. Going forward, the regulatory entities, CPUC and or others, are going to be faced with essentially a prediction dilemma. That is, what happens if data centers that are built become obsolescent, or the market demand is not as great as for the products of the AI companies, and you're left with a white elephant. And the costs of that could be transferred to ratepayers. And I know it's very, as Yogi Berra said it well, the hard thing about predicting the future is that you don't know about the future. And there's been a lot of commentary in the popular press about stranded assets. And do you have any suggestions about how we or regulators could take into account future developments in technology or in market dynamics that don't put too much of the risk equation on the companies, but don't leave ratepayers being the insurer? And we face this pretty acutely in the homeowners insurance context, where for years and years, the insurance department did not use reinsurance principles. And so maybe you could comment on how to spread the risk of a lower amount of utilization and or potentially stranded assets.
Yes, that's definitely an issue Tern is very concerned about. We've already seen, PG&E coming in saying, oh, we've got all this, interest in data center developers, but then not all of it has materialized. Because I think data centers right now really, they're looking for any grid capacity and any generation capacity. And so they are spreading themselves very, casting a wide net, talking to a lot of utilities, and then not necessarily planning to build there. But the good thing about PG&E's Rule 30 tariff is that it does, put a lot of that risk back on data centers. And there's a few proposed modifications Tern and Cal Advocates has made to those contract terms to make sure that, the customer doesn't get refunded for the upfront costs they pay too early. In the event that they leave the system prematurely, we want an exit fee. So if they do leave before, their 10-year contract, they have to pay back part of any of the refunds they get, that kind of thing. I personally, and I don't think Tern thinks that we should be spreading the risks to all customers, because the data center should be bearing the risks of leaving early. Their load is causing these transmission infrastructure upgrades, and they should pay for them. And then they should be on the hook if they do leave early before their, increased sales can pay back the cost of the infrastructure they're caused. We skipped over the slide on, residential ratepayers, but they're really in a tough spot here in California. Tern has a hotline where we get calls every day from people who are being disconnected, and it's just gotten to be really unaffordable for a lot of Californians, especially those who are investor-owned utility customers. A lot of municipal utility rates are not nearly as high as these investor-owned utility rates. So we don't think there's really any headroom left in residential rates for ratepayers to absorb extra risks caused by data centers, which, I can't help but say are generally very large, well-capitalized companies that I would say can afford it a lot better than most California households can.
So to summarize your testimony, you think California should adopt the Oregon rule, that it should expand Rule 30 to include Type 4 transmission network upgrades, and you think that there should be a repayment requirement for stranded assets?
That's a good summary, yeah. It's not exactly a repayment, but an exit fee if they do leave before the contract term.
Thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Torres, did we manage to hijack your entire presentation?
No, it was great.
Okay, all right.
Sorry to jump around, but
well, I told you the folks
you all know a lot.
Yeah, they would have. Well, they would have read your material. Thank you very much for providing that, and I think it does help to illustrate the challenges, right? That residential ratepayers are confronted with, and I think it's really very telling, the comment that you made, that as it relates to individual residential ratepayers, that balloon is pretty full. You're not really going to be able to pump much more in there, particularly given the rates that we pay presently. So,
one last question, if that's good.
Yeah, of course.
Energy efficiency. has that even been discussed in terms of requiring something on energy efficiency? I mean, right now, the sky's the limit in terms of utilization of megawatts. I mean, is that going to be a discussion in the future, bringing back energy efficiency, particularly for high use customers?
That's a great point, and really, I must say, not one that I've heard discussed. Even just the demand response program participation, we've gotten a lot of pushback on, and the battery storage requirements from PG&E, saying that the data centers wouldn't want to do that. But I think they can, and I think that's a first step, right? If they can at least curtail their load on our peak days when the grid really is strained, that would really be helpful.
Yeah, and we really don't want them firing up their diesel generators when they're asked to not use as much power. I mean, that is a legitimate concern, particularly for people who are residing in those neighborhoods and whatever the prevailing winds are. So again, thank you, Ms. Torres, for your presentation. It's been very helpful. Daniel?
You're welcome. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Nava. Our next witness is Dr. Liang Min, who serves as Managing Director of Stanford University's Bits and Watts Initiative, where he leads multidisciplinary efforts to modernize the electric grid and recently launched the Powering AI Sustainability Program to address AI's growing energy needs while supporting a clean, reliable power system. Dr. Min's career includes leadership roles at the Electric Power Research Institute, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and the CES 21 Electric Operations Program. He holds a PhD from Texas A&M University and Master's in Science and Bachelor's of Science degrees from Tianjin University. Dr. Min, you may begin your testimony.
Thank you, Daniel, and thanks for having me. I apologize, I just recovered from cold, so I lost half of my voice, but happy to do this one. Daniel, can you bring back the slides? Thank you very much. California is the world lead on artificial intelligence. The big question now is, can we also lead energizing and powering AI? So in late June, we host a Speed to Power AI roundtable in Sacramento with about 50 people from industry, including utilities, data centers, tech companies, government agencies, universities. We ask one central question: how can California build the electrical system we need for fast-growing AI demand, while we're still meeting the clean energy and affordability goals? And then we published these readouts about a couple months ago, and myself and two of my colleagues co-authored these readouts. But we also have a bunch of Stanford researchers contribute to this report. Next slide, please. So today, what I'm going to share is really some of the key lessons we learned and also some early research results from these conversations. So California is world leader on AI, as I said, and California also has the cleanest electricity in the country, has more batteries than any other state. But even with all the innovation and the talent, California is still risking falling behind of data center development to other states because of the permitting take very long. The grid upgrade are delayed. As a result, companies are choosing places like our neighboring states, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah instead. And when the data center leaves, and very likely the AI workforce, research jobs may leave as well. And this is a real risk for state of California. Next slide. So I think we are reached an important turning point. So AI and the computing demand is raising far faster than the current electrical grid can handle. So if California wants to stay competitive and still meet our climate and affordability goal, we have to do something. So we summarize in the 5 action items. The first one is really streamlines interconnection and permitting. It takes years to build transmission lines, average between 8 to 10, but in reality, it could be much longer. The current process is slow because of long study, equipment delays, complex environmental reviews. So we need fast interconnections and one-stop permitting venues. And the second is about enhanced grid utilization and reliability. And I heard that somebody mentioned the energy efficiency, right? And but do we have the metrics to evaluate how efficient we utilize our grid. So in the next couple of slides, I'm going to show that our research finds that the transmission line utilize less than 40% of their capacity on average. So before we spend billions of dollars on new transmission line, we really need to think about how we unlock this underutilized capacity for the existing grid. And the third one, we discussed a little bit from the previous presenter regarding the AI demand flexibility. Right? And we designed the system for the peak. The peak only happens 1% of the time of the year. So the AI on-site premise, including AI working load, we may have a battery inside of that, and may have some fuel cell clean generation inside the warehouse, can help the AI factory shift to the off-peak time, and we can fit more demand into the existing grid without sacrifice reliability, without building new infrastructure. And the next one is build more clean firm power for data centers. The AI data center load need a very reliable 24/7 electricity. If we look into one county, Silicon Valley, their load factor is about 85%, 80% for sure. So, and when we deploy more AI factory, we also need to take this advantage to encourage them to procure more clean firm resources like geothermal. Because even without data centers, the state of California, when we deploy more variable generations, we will need a clean, firm, and dispatchable resource for the stability of our grid. And last but not least is really introduce new technology business model. I think one, I like the most is really the previous speaker mentioned, highlight the Rule 30. So we see across the country, especially in the data center focus areas, and they're willing to do like a long-term take-or-pay kind of contract to help fund the grid upgrade upfront. This help reduce the delay and also be able to help shift the risk from the general customers into the data centers themselves. So I will make a stop here. I see Dave has a question.
Very good. Thank you. Commissioner Byer.
Well, thank you for your testimony. I find it fascinating, compelling, balanced. And so my question is really one of process. I've been involved in many stakeholder listening sessions in my life, and it sounds like that's what you did in Sacramento. And so my question really is advice you might have about how to deal with the fundamental underlying distrust of government and of AI. Today, there's a report out by Edelman and their Trustometer, which basically says the United States citizens are more distrustful of AI than any other country in the world. And so the lack of understanding, sometimes fear of AI is motivating people to be deeply concerned, maybe bordering on Luddite, saying, well, no, we just don't want any more data centers. We don't want them in California. These companies are bad. That's a cartoon. On the other hand, there are legitimate ratepayer concerns, environmental concerns, and the agenda you lay out assumes a government-private sector partnership, which is based on shared values and shared perspectives. And so from your experience of dealing with stakeholders, industry, government, what suggestions do you have that are going to facilitate not the technical conversation that would occur in the Public Utility Commission, but rather this broader societal question of how do we align ourselves so that we advance the human condition through the use of AI and facilitate creation of enough power to do that responsibly, where the risks are shared between companies and the public, and that the government and the private sector have clear, explicit rules of behavior that are balanced. What do you recommend to us?
So I'm an electrical engineer by training. I think this is a very good question, and I'm happy to refer to some of our human AI entity to help on this one. But I can give you my quick try. So basically, I think the two words are very important. One is transparency, and one is really the benchmarkable data sets to increase the trustness for any AI technology bring to the societies. I think that's a two very important. And the key fundamental thing I want to see in our area is because we do not have a very clear transparency in the system. For instance, if I ask one question, say we need to build transmission line, but how good we utilize our existing systems? What's utilization rate for our existing transmission network?
So on the technology side, I have some questions about utilization of the current system. You're saying there's a bunch of unused capacity. Others would say we're only using 30 or 40% in order to secure resilience where there's great variation, and that you've overstated the amount of unused capacity. How do you respond to that critique?
That's very good critique. So I think the data will show what is actual utilization with the consideration to prevent the worst case contingencies. So in the next few slides, you will see the details.
So does the industry, the investor-owned utility industry, agree with you? And if not, why not?
I think we should let the data to tell a story. And if you don't mind, let's move to the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So this is a new results we just studied, and this is across the whole West interconnections. And then what we realize that across the entire West grid, most of the transmission line are used far below their limits. And even this is under 2025 heavy summer peak, by seeing that we're not study the winter case, we're not study the night condition, we study the peak conditions, the worst conditions. And under N-1, which means that the grid is stressed and one major line is out, and then many parts of system still lightly used. That's the condition we are right now. So on average, transmission line in different control area across the WEC only carry about 18% to 50% of their rated capacity. And then many of the clusters close to only about 30 or 35%. And this means that even during the tough operating conditions on the N-1, large section of the Western interconnections still have room to carry more power. And there's a real headroom that could help to serve new load, manufacturing load, electrification load, AI data centers, and even connect new clean energy generation into the grid, because we also have huge generation interconnection questions. So if we learn that how to connect it, and if we know that where's the locations that still have the capacity, be able to connect data center, connect to larger manufacturing load, etc. Next slide. Then I'm going to deep dive. Let's zoom into California. Right? California shows the same pattern, but more clearly, under the stress conditions, still N-1, we call it. The 115 kV transmission lines are loaded about 32%, 31.8% on average. And the 230 kV lines is about 37%. And we have very little 345 kV and 500 kV, that's interregional, right? 345 kV is 14%, 500 kV is 31%. In other words, most of our transmission system, our high voltage lines, are run way under half their capacity. Keep in mind, this is a summer peak case. This is under N-1 conditions. There's a lot of unused capacity across every voltage level. But the devil is on the details. When we look into about 1,200, 230 kV line on your right-hand side in California, we saw a long flat stretch of line that are very lightly used. Only a small number in the tail of the lines show very high loading or stressed. These few lines and the constraints around them are what hold back the entire systems. Just like when you have a highway, I think when one of the commission described the highway, right? If the highway is congested, nobody can get rid of, the exit of highway is congested, nobody can get out of the highway. And the local community is almost, you don't see any cars there. Right? And so in California, if California focus on fixing just these hotspots, and we can unlock a large amount of capacity on the rest of the grid. And it's a very targeted strategical way to make a system work better. So what does it mean for the path forward? So first is, before we build any new transmission line, let's think about how we make better use of existing grid we already have. And this is the fastest way to bring the data center online. We don't need a new transmission line. We just find a place and underutilized, let's do it. And we don't need to wait on about 10 years to have a new transmission line built, because this is capacity today we can unlock very quickly. And the second, keep in mind, even without data center, we have aging infrastructure issues. And the tail of this distribution, right, the 50 or 20 to 30 kV lines, they are aging. Even without data center, we still have to fix them. Right? Fix them cost money. So the state has real opportunity to upgrade and strengthen the grid to improve the safety and reliability, especially when the system getting larger, has more complex. And the third is really the philosophy we discussed previously. If we increase how much of the load we use, increase utilization, this will help us to spread the fixed cost over more electron to be sold. And this eventually could help lower the customer bill over the time. But this is on the transmission portion, right? And this will not go to the distribution to split more electron to the customers. But the big message is really the following. Right? There's more room on the grid than people think. If we use it wisely, California can support AI growth and add more clean generation and keep the cost down. So I will conclude my quick conversation here.
Yeah, so this is Pedro Nava, and I think one of the things that we've learned as commissioners is that the utilities, and investor-owned utilities included, don't make any money on the sale of electricity. They whatever they pay for it, that's what they pass through. Where they make money is in infrastructure, the construction, right? So building the transformers, installation of that stuff and the lines. So what is fascinating about what you are saying is that if the investor-owned utilities use your approach, they don't make money because they're not buying and building new infrastructure. They're not going to make the same return if they use existing capacity because there's more room in the pipes. Basically what you're saying is when the pipes aren't full, and that with an intelligent application of where you put the electrons, you can use what you already have in place to a large degree. Is that right?
That's the general philosophy, but keep in mind we have aging infrastructure issues, right?
Yeah, okay.
And if you don't fix these 50 lines, and you will still cannot increase the overall utilizations.
Got it.
Right. Yeah.
So right.
Even without data centers, utilities still have the obligation to provide reliable power.
Right.
They have to fix this 50 transmission line, 230 kV lines, right? And the data center just trigger the process quickly.
Understood. So in a way, the specter of data centers is being used as the justification for investing money in the new infrastructure when you already have to do that to a certain extent. But I'm getting the idea that you don't need to do it to as large a scale as the investor-owned utilities are suggesting you need to do it. I mean, that's what I take away from what I understand of your testimony.
And we need also change of mind is really kind of power first, because right now a lot of data center developers, they secure land, send interconnection requests to the utilities, right? It's highly congested in certain area like San Jose and others. Mm-hmm. They don't know where they have a power or not, but we should tell them that there's a location where power available. You can get connected. We don't need to build new transmission line. You can connect it faster and also be able to introduce electron to the system very quickly, eventually lower the cost. So that's a key message to understand: power first instead of land first.
Well, that's kind of like what Commissioner Beyer was saying, that there are sites that are preferable because of the proximity to power that are better than others. That would, I guess it's analogous to, if you're going to sell boats, you're better off being next to a river instead of having to build a canal to your lot.
That's absolutely right, because there's a latency, the communication latency requirements, etc. Yeah.
Understood. All right. Any other questions from commissioners for Dr. Min? I'm seeing none, but I want to tell you how much we appreciate your contribution to our conversation.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Doctor. Back to Daniel.
Thank you, Chair Nava. Our next witnesses are Linda Taub-Gordon and Mashika Allgood. Linda Gordon is the climate researcher at the Berkeley Human Rights Center and supervising attorney in the Human Rights Center Investigations Lab. She is currently leading research at the Human Rights Center on the environmental and human rights impacts of hyperscale data centers in California. Ms. Gordon is barred in the state of California and received her JD from Berkeley Law and BA from Barnard College at Columbia University. Mashika Allgood is an AI ethicist and the founder of All AI Consulting, LLC, a platform for providing education to people with non-technical backgrounds. She is an active member of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers and currently serves as a subject matter expert for its environmental impacts and artificial intelligence working group. Ms. Allgood's first foray into AI ethics was as the founder and lead of NVIDIA's first AI ethics workgroup. She holds numerous degrees, including a master's in international business from Florida International University and a JD from Florida State University's College of Law. Ms. Gordon and Ms. Allgood, you may begin your testimony.
Thank you. Hello, Commissioners. The processes that determine where and how hyperscale data center construction is approved are difficult for local residents to understand. The communities most affected by these projects are often left without a clear path to engage with development and participate in decisions that will shape their health, resources, and future. Based on our research, the Human Rights Center and Taps Run Dry are creating a resource for local stakeholders, including local governments and residents, to provide meaningful review of proposed data centers' energy and resource consumption and impacts on local communities. While our work is ongoing, I'm here today to share some insights into what we found from our preliminary research and survey of existing literature and legislation. But first, I'd like to take a step back to emphasize why this topic is a human rights issue. The explosive growth of data center developments in California has implications for several key human rights. Regarding the right to health, hyperscale data centers produce air pollution, which directly impacts the health of communities in California, many of whom are already living with some of the worst air quality in the country. And regarding the right to water and sanitation, hyperscale data centers require enormous quantities of water, which stress already dry communities and exacerbate the risk of water shortages. Regarding the right to housing, where data centers are built can have impacts on property values and housing availability. Displacement resulting from a hyperscale data center's noise and health impacts may also be a concern. And regarding the right of access to information, information is critical to realize Californians' freedom of expression and meaningful public participation in this data center boom. Allowing facilities to operate without even tracking or reporting their own energy and water consumption makes mitigation harder to plan and makes government oversight and public access to information less effective or even possible. Academic research, investigative journalism, and government oversight are, oh, yes, I see a hand.
Commissioner Byer.
Yeah, I want to stick on the data point. We recently did a report on the California Environmental Quality Act, and that report has been in part enacted into law and signed by the governor to improve on the pre-existing law on environmental reviews. And so some of what you're talking about is frankly beyond the direct scope of electricity rates, and I'm going to put that aside, but I tend to agree with you on the data point. And understand the legislative process last year or this year. But the dilemma is if you disclose trade secret information, that's not a good thing. It's not a business-friendly environment. And so is there a way of anonymously or anonymized data provide information that can guide policymakers without disclosing the plans or the methods used by companies in the context of data center. And let's just stick with energy use and leave water aside. Because I'm sympathetic with what you're suggesting, but you have to sort of take into account what the other side's going to say. And they're going to say it's trade secret information. And how do you either reach a compromise or how do you rebut their claims?
Miss Allgood can barely constrain herself. Look at that. I think you have an answer.
I saw that. So it's not trade secret. I think that's your basic rebuttal. Google puts out facility level water data for 80% of the facilities that they currently have for AI data centers. So they put it out in their CSR report. It's page 110, 111. They have a chart. And no one is like catching up to Google because they know how much water their facilities use. So I think we've all kind
I'm
of.
sorry, we're talking about electricity, not water.
No, it's the same thing. They also put out electricity information.
Okay, so what in the legislative process, if you know, why was there an objection to the data disclosure provision and led to its not being enacted?
Because this has been part of the playbook for data centers from day one. They don't disclose this kind of information. They claim
Who is they?
data
Is
center
it-
operators.
Is
So-
it the hyperscale companies or is it the financial backers or the operators or all?
She's frozen.
Okay,
There you go. You're back.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
So data center operators is the they. Since the very early, like once the data center started, AI data center started being a thing, there has been just a general non-transparency movement amongst large tech operators to start. So Amazon, Google, Facebook, Meta, but just as a general rule, data center operators. So you've got some of your general hyperscalers, your older, more traditional data center operators who do provide a bit more information, but this is the playbook for the AI data center operators. So they utilize non-disclosure agreements with cities in order to keep them from telling the public what their water use, what their electricity use is, and then they often sue to try to keep governments, municipal governments, from providing that information. So I think this is a statement that is said a lot of times by data center operators that this is to some degree some sort of trade secret, but you cannot tell what a data center operator is doing within that data center based on how much electricity they use. So I would push back on that as a fact, and that's how I would start that conversation. But I'll let Linda speak to that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I think to Mashika's point, I think that there is litigation that has played out in other states and in California, which challenges whether this information is a trade secret or not, and whether the right of privacy does apply. I also think that the recent AB 222 legislation that was proposed could still, in a future form, reach the governor's desk. It did not make it out of the assembly this time around, but I think in the bill analysis, there's a lot of interesting content there, which points to ways that the information could be provided to the CPUC, to the CEC. I think there are also different kinds of disclosures that are already made to the CEC, and this information has been aggregated and then is posted on the CEC's website and charts. So I think, and that has been going on for a little while now. So I think that there is a balance definitely here that the legislature would want to strike, but I do think that through the legislation that has been introduced, it could be revisited, and there is a way forward.
Thank you.
So please continue.
Yes. And I think that academic research, investigative journalism, and government oversight are rapidly expanding for hyperscale data centers. And there is a particular focus on the reliability and affordability of electricity and the need for increased transparency in the evaluative methods for the approval of a data center and monitoring of its impacts. And government oversight through better enforcement of existing regulations as well as the creation of new policies can significantly impact whether or not the risks hyperscale data centers pose to a community materialize or not. Rulemaking, which is underway, has the potential to address many of these concerns. However, trends in rulemaking and legislation that also consider methods to streamline data center approval with exemptions or new processes risk impeding the reliability, affordability, and transparency concerns for communities. And I'll pass it now to my colleague to continue.
Yeah, I will say that a lot of the areas that I wanted to raise have been raised by speakers, thankfully. But I will go through my comments. The key things I want you to take away from my testimony is that the real world impacts of the AI data center build out are physically problematic for three reasons, and that would be affordability, water, and air. Affordability has been discussed to some degree today, but lower income Californians spend about 80% of their household expenses on food, housing, transportation, and healthcare. That leaves them 20% for utilities and just basic life. And it's not enough. 2 years ago, KQED was reporting on people choosing between running their air conditioner in the midst of a heat wave or paying their rent. Our three major electricity providers have had an average of 7 rate increases since then. So while we can tabulate down to the penny how much of those increases went to wildfire protection, there's absolutely no transparency on how much of that money went to building out transmission infrastructure for large load data centers, because there's no category for reporting that kind of spending in our current rate increase processes. UC Riverside recently found that California consumed 47 billion gallons of water to generate 10.8 terawatts of electricity for data centers in 2023. That's 47 billion gallons of water gone from California aquifers, never to return. And now people are looking to plug data centers directly into water treatment plants that the citizens of the state have spent billions of dollars and decades building in order to meet that. There's a trade-off between water and electricity when it comes to cooling, right? So they can't use electricity, they use water. If they can't use water, they use electricity, right? So they're trying to plug into treatment plants at this time. And these are modern data centers with closed loop cooling systems that still consume millions of gallons of water a year. So now they'll be consuming that water directly from the backup water storage systems that all Californians are intended to rely on during our increasingly long drought cycles. And for every terawatt of electricity used by large load data centers, it is backed up by a massive on-site diesel generator installation, sometimes more than one. Every minute those installations run, they spew a cloud of noxious gas, including fine particle diesel pollution that gets into your bloodstream, attaches to your red blood cells, and then hitches a ride around your body to wreak havoc on your internal systems. 24 hours of exposure to this pollution can cause serious adverse health impacts, but the laws allow these installations to run for up to 100 hours a year. The speed and scope of the requested large load data center build-out poses a threat to the water, air, and affordability for all Californians. And the goal of this commission and every other governmental entity that interacts with it is to ensure a reasonable quality of life for all California residents. So the burden should be on large load data center operators to provide proven, scalable, independently verifiable methods for operating their facilities within the limits of California's resources in harmony with the government's responsibilities to its residents. So we did not include slides. That's on me. I apologize. But I did want to follow up on a couple of the things that we heard earlier. First, about load shifting. There's this idea that, we can use load shifting to move intense workloads off of the grids when there's issues of stress and things of that nature. And there is some movement that way from a technical standpoint. However, load shifting can only be done by owner-operated data center facilities. So if I'm a hyperscale data center, which means just a hyperscale data center operator, but not an owner-operated, that means I'm operating a facility where I control the physical parts of the building, right? The cooling, the heating, the air, the water, I control that. I cannot tell the people who are leasing within my facility to move their loads, right? So if we're building hyperscale data centers that are not owner operated, that ability to do load shifting based on moving AI workloads here and there to respond to demand conditions doesn't actually exist. So when we ask them to, pare down from the grid, they move to diesel power generators. They don't really have any other options, right? In UC Riverside, Dr. Shaolei Ren just came out with their study, and what they found was a lot of the data centers that are being proposed right now are these co-location facilities, right? And so we need to understand, even within large load data centers, there's different types of large load data centers, and that impacts how they're able to make these kind of demand shifts, load shifts when it comes to, releasing some demand back to the grid. So I did want to raise that based on the previous question.
Well, that's an important look. Let me see if I understand. So you're saying that the definition that applies in order to impose load shifting is on an owner operator, correct?
I said not that the definition applies, the capability to do so.
Okay, right. I mean, English is a second language for me. So what that really says is that we need to broaden the authority to make that demand of the facility to someone besides an owner operator.
And that would be a difficult proposition because people are leasing property. It's just like I lease my apartment. It's very hard for my landlord to come in and tell me what to do with it, right? And so that's essentially what you would be asking these folks to do, is to tell their lessees,
right,
you need to move your load right now. And that's
unless you make that a condition of the lease. Right?
Yeah, I'm not saying it can't be done. Yeah, it can.
I'm the owner, and I'm going to lease to you. So one of the conditions is you have to pay me X amount of dollars on the first of the month, right? Another condition is that you cannot engage in conduct that is harmful to the overall operation. And so maybe a third condition is when whoever it is that makes the demand for load shift makes the demand, you as the lessee, as a condition of the lease, have to do it. Can't we do that?
It is a thing that can be done. It will be difficult.
It's all, believe me, given what's going on with AI, it's all going to be difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, the president of the United States is drafting an executive order to prohibit states from legislating guardrails on AI. So if he has his way, there'll be one standard. It'll be the Trump standard on the same people that are spending the money to build his ballroom. So yeah, it's going to be difficult. And I made reference earlier to the amount of money that is being spent in lobbying in Sacramento, huge amounts of money to talk about, please don't interfere with us, because if you do, we're going to move to Uzbekistan and we'll build our stuff over there. So yeah, it's going to be hard. But I also think, and I read the All AI report, and I think this ought, I don't know, Ethan, if all the documents that are submitted, and they're part of the agenda that's on the website. The public should access the documents that are posted on the website, because I don't think that we've had any discussion. And again, as I said when I did the opening remarks, we're talking about the cost of electricity. We were also asked to take a look at why is California so unaffordable, and you've identified a number of areas why it is so unaffordable. But the issue with respect to water is astounding. It's absolutely astounding. And I think if we were to pay attention to it as a state, it would cause us a great deal of concern. You're talking about the amount of water to supply 9.6 gigawatts of energy that's requested in PG&E's current modern data center pipeline. Given that the average American household uses 300 gallons of water a day, that's enough to support 166 million households, or half the US population. That's what's being proposed now with just water. Now, every time I turn around, I'm told there's a drought. I'm told that we're supposed to, I live in Santa Barbara. They pay me money to tear out my lawn so I don't have so I don't have to water it. If you're in Central California and you're an agricultural community, you've already got subsidence problems. because the land is like sunk, I don't know how many feet. Anthony, you would probably know a little bit about that. So the issue of these data centers is one that I'm beginning to appreciate is significantly even more impactful than just the cost of kilowatts.
Yes.
So,
I would focus very heavily on Dr. Shale Ren's estimations that he's been doing a lot of work on water. This is I've been doing a lot of work on water, but you know the math part that's his area that he's been focusing very heavily on, and he has some really kind of staggering assessments of what it costs to generate electricity,
right,
and the issues that we have is wind doesn't require water to generate electricity, right? Geothermal doesn't require water, hydro doesn't require water,
right.
but we get a lot of water from natural gas, or use a lot of water for natural gas. A lot of our energy generation comes from that. And then nuclear is actually a pretty large source of energy. So when you look at, do we need to bring on new energy generation sources in order to power this electricity? Then those are where these real concerns come in, right? Because either ramping up on what we focus on heavily right now, or moving forward, building more energy generation.
Right.
It is difficult right now to build a pipeline of wind or solar or battery because those parts are hard to get, right? And because we've had some federal kind of guidelines that have changed the focus of like how we do that. And so it's been really it's a difficult conversation, but electricity ties itself to all of these various things. Linda, I wanted to give you a chance to speak.
Yeah,
And
I
then,
just
Commissioner
on
Breyer.
the oh, apologies.
Commissioner Byer, you're muted. You're muted, Dave. David, you're muted.
I just wanted to respond quickly to oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to add, considering the relationship between water and electricity. I mean, you were quoting some of the statistics about current projected water required for the expansion PG&E projects. And I think it's also important to raise here that the governor also just vetoed AB 93, which would have required data center operators to report their estimated water usage and project their water needs. And that bill was vetoed. I want to note the reporting would have been just to the state agencies. It was not reporting to the public. So I think the trade secrets question also is aside here, but that was vetoed. So we're not even requiring these facilities to report projections of water usage when they're being approved.
Yeah, right. Commissioner Byer.
One observation and one suggestion. The observation is, Mr. Chairman, that one of the clear messages from today's testimony, for me at least, is that it is the legislature who needs to deal with these issues comprehensively, not the Public Utility Commission, because this is beyond electricity rates.
Yep.
And it has broader societal implications. And if you think about the projected capital expenditure on data centers globally between now and 2030, it's 1.7 trillion with a
Right.
T dollars.
Right.
And so there are profound effects. So yes, I think it should be the legislature, but I would be extremely cautious on the water question without hearing from a more diverse panel, because 80% of water use in California is in agriculture. We have a whole set of complex problems with the Colorado River. I mean, water is almost a completely different topic. And for our purposes, I would hope we would focus on the things that the legislature can concretely do something about within their areas of expertise that is not a, maybe pun intended, sinkhole.
Yeah, look, I agree with you, Commissioner Byer. And that's why my opening remarks were one of caution, and they were somewhat guarded. In that what we're looking at today, the architecture of our study, what we're working on is the cost of electricity, right? Why does it cost so much? What's going to happen? And that. But not to be included in the report, but I do think that there is a risk that significant areas will be overlooked. It may not necessarily be our job. It's not going to be now to talk about the confluence of water and energy costs and the things that are discussed in the AL AI report and by others, but it can't be ignored. Now, maybe we're not going to do it in this report, but I don't think we ought to ignore the fact that there are significant impacts from AI. And I get a little concerned with this rush to abundance that we've been confronted with recently. That the answer to everything is just build it, and goddamn it, whatever happens, it's worth it. And I think what we're learning little by little is there's reason to be somewhat cautious and responsible in a conversation about AI and the centers and how much energy and water it's going to take to build and run those operations. But I agree with you in terms of our scope. We're getting a lot of really good information here about the costs of electricity.
I did want to add one more before I go back to Linda. I did spend quite a bit of time talking about the electricity distribution costs and how those costs are basically transmission costs. And there right now in that structure isn't a way to delineate between what I'm using for, hardening the grid as opposed to what I'm using for building out for a new data center. So we have clearly been building infrastructure for new data centers because we keep turning around and there are new hyperscale data centers already either in production or online in California. But we're not able to track those costs. And those costs are being borne by ratepayers because the distribution costs, once again, as was discussed earlier, is borne by us. And these are capital distribution costs. And so unless there's some sort of category to indicate this is an investment in a new industry cost versus this is a health, safety, load management for the distribution, I think we're having hidden costs that are going into our ratepayer rates.
Right, understood. Yep. So as is our practice, the commissioner has just interrupted and hijacked your presentation, but I want to make sure that the two of you had the opportunity to give us the information you thought was important so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have struck on one of the key things we were trying to communicate, which was how interconnected these different issues are. And from the local community's perspective, when the facility is being approved and the energy allocation is approved, all of the overall impacts should be considered when it comes to how they'll affect the community's health and safety and information. And I think access to information is a key need right now that the legislature can address.
Yep. And that should be encouraged. In spite of the fact that I'm sure that you don't have as many millions of dollars as other people do to go lobbying. Any other questions or comments by commissioners? Seeing none, I want to thank you both for providing us with this information and taking the time to do it. Daniel.
All right. Thank you, Chair Nava. Our final witness is Natalie Mims-Frick, who serves as department leader and an energy policy researcher in the Energy Markets and Planning Department at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, where she leads research on energy-related topics pertaining to large load growth, distribution system planning, affordability and efficiency, and energy policy. Before joining the lab, Ms. Frick served as the Energy Efficiency Director at the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy and as a senior consultant at Rocky Mountain Institute. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in English and Political Science from Penn State University and a Master of Studies in Environmental Law from Vermont Law School. Ms. Frick, you may begin your testimony.
Thank you. So I have a few slides and they are all focused on large load tariffs. And we can go on to the next one. This is a report that the Berkeley Lab put out in January. My colleagues and I wrote it, and it looked at a variety of different aspects of large load tariff design that were emerging in January of this year, and there's been quite a lot of movement since then. We can go on to the next slide. This next slide just says that there's lots of reasons and motivations for looking at a large load or data center tariff. And it's, the regulators' priorities, and that they can drive how the tariff will come out based on what the priorities are. And it could be based on resource adequacy or affordability, a desire to attract these large loads to your state, or emissions reductions. We can go on to the next slide. There's 4 different themes that we kind of grouped the elements of large load tariffs into as we were reviewing them. And I guess just stepping back, we looked at about 13 different tariffs in January to understand what kind of themes and content were being included in these. And since then, I think about 25 more tariffs have been introduced across the country. So this is a national perspective, and it's something I've continued to follow since we published this report. But so the first element that we grouped was around cost allocation, and this is a super important topic. And some of the different elements that we found were making the tariff apply to a specific type of customer, and that can be defined by the size of the customer or by its industry code or some other parameters. Another element for cost allocation was around marginal pricing, making sure that the load that is causing costs to be incurred on the system are paying for those costs. And then the third one is on economic development. This actually can go both ways, but for an economic incentive for a large load to come, but also we've seen a couple of states put in requirements in settlement agreements as part of tariffs that the large load customers make contributions to low-income energy efficiency programs in the state. So it's payments that are going in both directions that we're seeing. We can go on to the next slide. The second theme that we found was around mitigating risk, and this is also something that there's been a lot of discussion about today, and all the other conversations I've been having on this. And these are some of the elements that we've been seeing for mitigating risk. The first one is requirements for upfront payments and exit fees. So upfront payments could be a contribution in aid of construction or some other mechanism, but making sure that you have your money as you're spending it is effectively what those criteria are. The second one is credit ratings and collateral requirements. So ensuring that you either have money in hand or that the large loads that are requesting electricity service have credit rating that's sufficient for the utility to feel that they're a valid customer. Another one is on contract duration. So, we're seeing tariffs that are about 12 to 15 years is kind of where the average is falling. So it's a requirement that you're going to be served for that quantity of time. And then there's a capacity that you are signing up for. Some of them are allowing their large load customers to resize their capacity if they realize that they're not using it all, which can be useful. It's not in all of the tariffs, though. And then finally, this minimum load requirements and demand charges. There's some take or pay aspects that other speakers have talked about. There's also requirements that you are paying for the amount of capacity that you've contracted for. I see we have a question.
You keep this up, you don't even need a chair, but go ahead. Commissioner Byer. You're muted, David.
Sorry. Thank you. This is a great slide, and I'd like to maybe pause on this for a second. And one of the problems in dealing with AI is the risk of the fallacy of analogy. That is AI like fire? Is it like electricity? Is it like railroads? Is it like the internet? One of the things that we're forced to deal with is the risk of failure. And so some of these things are methods of protecting the taxpayer or ratepayer in the event of a problem. That is, companies go into business, go out of business. And so is there a way to assess essentially the costs of this kind of fiscal insurance. In other words, if you compare states one to another, and this is what your lab does, and it creates commonalities between tariffs in different states, is there a way of assessing, is it better to do business in North Dakota or Ohio or Northern Virginia in terms of the imposed cost for creating a data center? In other words, how is California going to think about competing on the one hand and protecting taxpayers and ratepayers on the other? Do you have a suggestion for us on that?
I think that these four elements are present in almost every large load tariff that I've looked at that's come online this year. And so I think having these elements would allow you to remain competitive. I think that there's other factors in play that are outside of the tariff. How much of a tax incentive you're receiving as a large load customer coming to the state. If the location is lucrative for latency reasons or otherwise, the water issue that we've been discussing. So I think the tariff is just one piece of it in order to remain competitive. And I think that you can have the general thought is that the primary concern of large loads today is speed to power. And so if you can provide them with power, you will be the most competitive. Even if you put larger restrictions on them, if they can access electricity sooner than they would be able to in other places there's lots of data centers in Virginia because of latency and they need to be around their like data ocean, right? Like there's economies of scale and efficiencies, and that's why they want to be located there. So putting those issues aside, if you're able to provide them with power and you have all of these other criteria that they need, you'll still be competitive even with restrictions. That's what I think.
So if I could maybe offer a hypothesis, if there were a grand social bargain that is improvement in time to get power by permitting reform and speed on that part of things, that you could also impose some greater societal cost on the data centers who, as you say, predominantly want time to power, and they would be willing to either pay more or pay differently over time for problems like stranded assets or part of the distribution cost or something like that. Is that a fair summary of what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I think that if you can provide these customers with power, that they will be more flexible in the other terms that you're putting on them. And it doesn't
So,
even have to be grid connected immediately. If you can facilitate them having large scale power of another variety, whether it's renewables or some kind of thermal power, then and connecting to the grid later on, like that's just as lucrative as being connected to the grid. I don't think any of them want to be. The sense that I have is that the large load customers do not want to be off the grid forever, but they're okay with being off the grid for the start.
okay. Yeah, I guess I'm making the point because permitting reform often sounds like you're, quote, giving something to the forces of capital as opposed to labor. And in this case, it may be that the permitting process is too slow, cumbersome, bureaucratic, could be sped up without putting anybody in jeopardy on resilience or environmental things, and that could be a good trade-off for risk sharing on the financial side vis-a-vis ratepayers and others.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the other thing to consider is that there is generally a lack of clarity around what the process is for large loads to interconnect across the country. It's different within each RTO. It's different within each utility, sometimes in each state. It's different at different voltage levels. It's different if you're a transmission owner or you're a transmission provider. And so I've been working on a research product that will try and lay out opportunities to streamline your existing processes just to make it more clear of this is what the requirements are. This is when the distribution utility needs to talk to the transmission utility. This is when the transmission utility needs to be talking to the RTO. This is what happens if the RTO has a tariff that doesn't promote flexibility and your retail utility does have a tariff that requires flexibility. How are all of these pieces going to come together? So I think that it's before throwing things out, it's important to step back and say, like, what could we do to simplify what we currently have? And there's a couple of states who've been going through that. New Mexico opened a proceeding to look at what their existing CPCN for new generation and integrated resource plan rules were, and was examining if they needed to change them or if they needed new ones or if they could just be modified in some way in order to appropriately deal with large loads. There's a variety of task force that states have opened in order to deal with large load customers in New Mexico and Arizona and North Carolina and Montana. So there's also different proceedings trying to just have conversations that are outside of contested cases that are happening. Pennsylvania recently put out an order from an informational proceeding that they were having where they had a lot of stakeholders come in and answer a variety of different questions around, if you could be connected faster, but you had to be flexible and you had to drop load under these circumstances, would that be something that's of interest to you? And, everybody, all of the participants in this docket answered the question. And then the commission put out a tentative order with guidance on tariffs for the state of Pennsylvania earlier this month. And so I think there's ways to just explore what you have and think about what you could do without making significant changes.
Thank you.
Because sometimes we just don't need more rules. Sometimes we just need to look at the rules we have. We can go on to the next slide unless there's other comments. So this is, I think, my third theme that I wanted to talk about, and this is mitigating operational and resource adequacy risks. Some of the tariffs that we have been looking at have minimum load factor requirements. Some of them, almost all of the tariffs have ramp times built in, and that's really both for operational but also for consumer protections, so that the utilities know when the load is expected to be coming online. You want 100 megawatts, you're going to do 20 megawatts the first year, 40 megawatts the next year, etc. So it's staged. And then also, as we've heard several people talk about, behind the meter resources, whether that's diesel or battery or other types of resources, are starting to be addressed in tariffs. They're not often directly addressed in tariffs, though, for large load customers in particular. We can go on to the next slide. And I think this is my last one that I have. And this is, we're seeing components in the tariffs that are looking to accommodate the needs of large load customers. And a lot of the time, this is around creating opportunities to purchase clean energy. Nevada has their clean transition tariff, for example. There's also there's starting to be conversations around demand flexibility in this as well. And I know that we touched on this with prior speakers, and I think that Ms. Allgood's points around different data center ownership structures being indicative of what kind of demand flexibility is available is really important. I think also understanding that the different types of computing load will have different types of demand flexibility potential. Also remembering that all of this large load growth isn't only from data centers. There's flexibility from these other types of industries that are also driving growth across the country. And that, we also talked about efficiency. There's opportunities for efficiency and cooling in almost all of the data centers, especially if you're looking at it, as they're being built and it's not being done after the fact, as with any type of new construction. So those are all things that we're starting to see come up, as well as utility-specific data center efficiency programs, which, we've had custom and prescriptive industrial programs forever, but now we're starting to see specific data center focused utility offerings there too. So I think that was all of my slides. I tried to keep it short so that we would be able to have more conversations. So I'm happy to take any other questions that you all have.
Thank you. Let's other commissioners. Any additional questions? No, I don't see any further questions. So
I guess I would just say, oh, sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, please.
My only other suggestion would be some of my colleagues at the lab are doing a lot of work around demand flexibility in data centers, and they'll be releasing a report that is looking at the different load shapes of the different types of compute and coupling that with the air condition or the HVAC load, because it's really, your IT load and your HVAC load, that's kind of the drivers of what's in the data center. And um, looking at what the opportunities are across those different ownership and data center types, whether it's on-site generation or batteries or efficiency or being able to temporally or spatially shift your load, to other sites, or shift it in time. So that's some research that'll be coming out. Oh, and then for efficiency, LBNL has been working on data center efficiency for a very long time. My colleagues have I think since like 2008, maybe even earlier, there's been a Center for Excellence in Data Center Efficiency that's on LBL's site that has quite a lot of materials around technologies and efficiency with those. So more resources for you from the national labs.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. So before we close out this section, any other questions, comments? All right, seeing none, thank you very much for your contribution to our discussion. Appreciate it.
And Mr. Chairman, that is the final witness for today. And so we can move on to the public comment session, item number 2 on the agenda. For members of the public, this is the time to make public comment on any topic, data centers or anything else. If you wish to make public comment and you have joined via Zoom, please use the raised hand function in Zoom. If you have phoned into the meeting and you wish to make public comment, send an email immediately to littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov. That address is on your screen. Give us your phone number so that we know who to unmute. That's littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov. Send that immediately. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker, and total public comment is limited to half an hour. Commissioners will be able to hear you but not see you if you make public comment. I believe we have no one in the physical location, but we do have some people online who have indicated, at least one online, so I'll ask Shara to identify the first speaker.
The first speaker will be Michael Bocadoro. You now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Great, thank you very much. Michael Bocadoro, and I'm providing comments today on behalf of the Agricultural Energy Consumers Association. I want to align my comments with Tern and Ms. Torres. We work very closely with Tern. They're equivalent at the California Public Utilities Commission for the agricultural and food processing industries in California. I want to be very clear, high rates are not only a concern of residential ratepayers in California, they are a major concern for other business customers as well, ag, commercial, and industrial. Rates for farming and food processing in California are far higher than they are for our competitors in other states. California and PG&E in particular have the highest rates in the country that we're dealing with. And it's really clear to us that PG&E's rates are going to go far higher before we see any relief. They have 10 separate rate increases pending at the CPUC today, totaling more than $4.5 billion in rate base. That would be an annual increase each year. So AI is not the only thing driving growth in the electricity use. And there are other things. One of our big concerns is that if all this capital expenditure by PG&E is going to be made interconnecting data centers, it's not going to be available for other electrification needs in California. And we are already experiencing significant delays, 2 to 3 years or more. So if data centers are prioritized over other load, it will just exacerbate not just agricultural and food processing interests who are trying to connect additional loads. It will impact housing and other significant sectors of the economy. PG&E and other utilities are going to have to invest between $100 and $200 billion just to deal with the electrification needs of the grid. Most of that for transportation and building electrification. It's a massive investment that's going to only be exacerbated by additional data centers in the state. And then finally, I want to touch on 2 final points here. And we are concerned given recent public comments by PG&E executives about increased interest in data centers in the San Joaquin Valley. That's a huge concern for some of the reasons you've already heard today, and that's the issue of water. We are already expecting about 900,000 acres of San Joaquin Valley farmland that will need to go out of production over the next 10 years due to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and overall water scarcity in the San Joaquin Valley, as I know Commissioner Cannella is particularly aware of. And so any additional massive demands on water are going to exacerbate the loss of tremendous prime agricultural farmlands in the state. And then I want to just comment, I think Commissioner Nava, you hit the nail on the head. The utilities have a very much a perverse incentive to invest capital. The more capital they invest, the more profit for shareholders and higher pay for their executives. It's been something as a ratepayer advocate for over 30 years that you quickly come to understand. And that is, not the same incentive that other businesses have. When we invest money in the agricultural sector, it's not with a perverse incentive. There's no guarantee we're going to get a return on that investment. There's no guarantee it's going to get paid back. So we're very
Mr. Bocadoro, your 3 minutes has expired. If you can wrap up quickly, please.
Thank you very much. That is the conclusion of my comments.
Thank you very much. Shara, can we go on to the next speaker?
Our next speaker will be Alina Yen. You now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, commissioners, for this public hearing. I learned a lot about class rates, and just speaking from a resident in the city of San Jose, where PG&E has a peculiar implementation agreement, and I now feel rather misled on the cost savings narrative that's been pushed for our community. There was talk about clustering, and so we do have a cluster of like a 99 megawatt data center, as well as 250 megawatt data centers that are clustered around our water and wastewater treatment facility that's planned for. And the implementation agreement also states that overall it's a 2,000 megawatt capacity that's being built within our city. And so just thinking about those numbers and the impacts on our rates and how that's not being very clearly and transparently discussed is really concerning as a resident. And also, as previous speakers have mentioned, electricity is inextricably tied to water, which is essential to life, to the quality of life. And in terms of the mistrust on at least PG&E being a private utility company, they don't have a mandate to serve the public for the public good. Their mandate is to their shareholders, and they already are under reputation-wise, 85 felony count for their crimes in the Camp Fire and Paradise Fire, and those victims are still awaiting their reparations. Additionally, they are not being transparent with us in the city of San Jose to the residents about the impacts to our electricity rates. And I also noticed that in the presentation by Lang Min that grid capacity wise, Californians are efficient, conservators of electricity. We don't use that much, yet as the previous speaker just mentioned, we pay the highest rates. And I don't see those rates going down. I don't see the promises that they're making the city of San Jose and the residents of San Jose panning out, at least in the immediate future. And also considering the speculativeness of the AI industry and how this is such new and novel technology, this massive infrastructure build out, how is that going to pan out in the future if things are improved upon and they don't need all that infrastructure anymore? So there's a lot of unanswered questions for me, and I really hope that the commission I really appreciate this study, and I hope that perhaps maybe the commission can also share this study directly with cities that are really building out these hyperscale data centers and trying to fast track the permits and the approvals, yet they're not even having a discussion as robust as the one that I've heard today. We already have data centers approved in our city, and I would have really appreciated if we had a discussion or a public hearing like this, but we haven't. And so this is happening really quickly, and there's not a lot of accountability. And again, thank you to the commission.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yin. I believe we have no other speakers who have indicated a desire to make public comment. Is that correct, Shara?
That's correct.
Okay. Then, Mr. Chairman, we also have no emails and no one in the physical location. So we can close item number 2 and move on to item number 3 on the agenda with the Commission's permission, which is the consideration of the draft report on state contracting with nonprofits. That begins at page 23 of the Commission's packet. The subcommittee consisted, excuse me, of Commissioner Eriner and Commissioner Garcetti. Crystal was the lead staff member and drafted the report, and I'd like her to briefly present it before commission discussion. Crystal?
Thank you. In our study, we found that nonprofits with state grants often subsidize the delivery of state services with their own resources, and that state administrative systems can sometimes hinder instead of facilitate these partnerships. Additionally, recent legislation has asked state agencies to prioritize nonprofits working with underserved communities. These nonprofits tend to be smaller, have fewer resources, and comprise members of the communities they serve, which means they are the least able to subsidize these programs. A primary challenge faced by the state's nonprofit partners is how grant funds are paid to them. Traditionally, the state has employed a reimbursement method, which means that nonprofits must front the operational costs of providing the service before receiving any grant funding. State agencies do have the authority to provide up to 25% of grant funds up front, but in a snapshot of available grant opportunities, we've found only about 1/3 of available opportunities offered an advance payment and only 3% guaranteed one. Other payment problems include delayed payments. While the state is supposed to pay invoices within 45 days, 1/4 of our survey respondents reported waiting longer than 3 months to be reimbursed. We also learned that reimbursement rates for indirect costs often fall short of actual costs. These payment issues result in nonprofits tapping into the reserve funds, taking out lines of credit, and even reducing services or laying off staff. We learned that grant and contract terms often create administrative burdens and that the state lacks a quick, standard way to amend contracts during emergencies. Burdensome application processes and extensive reporting requirements also put a strain on the state's nonprofit partners, particularly those that cannot afford dedicated grant-writing staff. And finally, we learned that the state largely leaves it up to individual agencies to interpret statute, resulting in inconsistent application of innovative practices across state government. So today, we are presenting you with 12 recommendations related to payment issues, contract terms, reporting requirements, and creating an infrastructure to facilitate successful partnerships. In the interest of time, I will only highlight a few of these, though of course I'm happy to expand at Commissioner's request. So in these recommendations, we ask the state to mandate advance payments of 25% to nonprofits receiving state grants and 100% to nonprofits that have been in good standing with the state for at least 3 years. We ask the state to negotiate with nonprofit representatives to determine a grant payment schedule that ensures all nonprofits are paid in a timely manner. We ask the state to ensure its nonprofit partners are sufficiently reimbursed for the indirect costs by, at a minimum, tying indirect cost rates to the federal de minimis rate and allowing negotiated higher rates with justification. We ask the state to create a standardized process to quickly amend a contract during a declared state of emergency. We ask the state to establish a nonprofit liaison office within the Office of the Governor. And we ask the state to modernize grant management processes within the State Controller's Office by adopting statewide electronic funds transfers instead of using paper checks. So thank you for this opportunity to present the report. Mr. Chairman, I return the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me open up for comments from Commissioner Eriner, Commissioner Garcetti. You were the two, I believe, that were on the subcommittee on this. So your thoughts with respect to the draft report.
First of all, I want to thank staff for an excellent draft, okay, and getting all of the points that we heard in the hearings, if you remember. The state does business with thousands of nonprofits around, yearly, right? And what's obvious is there's as usual, very often we find, and particularly around with the commission, the lack of standardization about how how rules are promulgated. And so every agency, what you heard Crystal say is that every agency has its own rules about how they deal with their contractors, that kind of thing. Very often when things go through the General Services Agency or whatever that department is called now, because I think it changes its name on a regular basis, right? Things get stalled there, right? And so something's got to change here because the state needs to learn how to be a partner, right? It's not just that we're contracting with agencies to do some of the work that we need to be done, particularly with vulnerable populations, but we need to be a better partner. And so I think that's really what this report and these recommendations are about, is to do something about improving the way we relate to the nonprofits, that we ask to do very serious work under very difficult situations very often, particularly around emergency planning and all of that. So I'm hopeful that the commission will accept the full report. Thank you.
Commissioner Garcetti.
Thank you. I'm continuously blown away with the excellence of our staff in terms of the work that they do and the witnesses they find to bring forward to our public hearings. Because I learned so much at these public hearings myself. And I thought this particular report was the draft, a hard-hitting, fair report that should gather the attention of many in the legislature. And I hope we follow up on this because it deserves it. There are people in the nonprofit world that don't get paid much money. I know that because I've been involved in that world. And I think that if we were successful going forward with these recommendations to see that they are in fact implemented, everyone benefits from it.
Terrific. What I'm going to do, we're short one commissioner for a quorum. However, I'll entertain a motion and a second. We'll take the vote, and then I anticipate that there will be a commissioner that'll join us in a few minutes, and then I'll reopen the item for a final vote. So, all right, Commissioner Garcetti moves, Commissioner Aaroner seconds. Any questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Aye.
Commissioner Aaroner.
Aye.
Commissioner Byer. Senator Cabaldon. Assemblymember Chen. Commissioner Garcetti.
Aye.
Commissioner Hernandez. Commissioner Johnson. Commissioner Miller. Senator Nilo.
Aye.
Assemblymember Ortega. Commissioner Sidley. So, Mr. Chairman, we can take one additional vote when Commissioner Hernandez returns.
Right. All right. So let's suspend the vote on this particular matter and then move to the next agenda item.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So agenda item 4 is the future meeting and project and meeting schedule. We included the future meeting schedule just for reference. That's at page 40 of the packet. However, nothing has changed since last month. So that's just the schedule for next year. Item 4C is the selection of future study topics. And here I would direct the Commission's attention to the scoping memo on higher education issues, which begins at page 42 of the packet. As commissioners may recall, at the last meeting, the Commission approved a study of higher education topics, but requested a memo outlining the potential scope of that study. We had a request to study from the legislature to study institutional debt owed by students. The staff recommendation as contained in that memo is to proceed first with the study that responds directly to the legislative request from Assemblymember Pacheco and other stakeholders regarding student institutional debt. This would allow us to be responsive to the legislature, perhaps produce a report that would be usable for legislation in the coming year. And then, if desired, the Commission could move on to a broader study on the overall cost of higher education. That's outlined sort of in the second half of the scoping memo. But obviously, that's up to the Commission, and we're happy to answer any questions. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back to you for whatever discussion the Commission may wish.
Yep. Gates are open. Any questions or further comments?
I think the recommendation is a good recommendation and a safe way to go forward. So I would move we accept that recommendation and move forward in that fashion.
So there's a motion.
I'll second it.
There's a second by Commissioner Aaroner. to accept the recommendation of staff as a way to proceed. Let's call the question, please.
Mr. Chairman, do you want to very quickly go back to the first vote and take Commissioner Hernandez's vote on the adoption of the report? He is now here.
Well, let's do the item we're on right now.
Okay.
Because Hernandez is here, then we can get that passed with a quorum, and then we'll reopen the other
Just
vote.
a quick recap on the motion, and then I can vote for it.
I believe well, go ahead, Mr. Chairman, or do you want me to summarize?
Go ahead.
The motion here, Commissioner Hernandez, we moved on to item 4C, project future study topics. The motion is to basically proceed on the path laid out in the staff scoping memo, which is to first proceed with the study requested by the legislature on student institutional debt, and then, if the commission desires, proceed with a separate study on the overall cost of higher education, responding first to the legislative request. And the motion is to proceed on that basis. So, Mr. Chairman, shall I call the roll?
Please.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Aye.
Mr. Vice Chairman.
Aye.
Commissioner Aaroner.
Aye.
Commissioner Byer. Senator Cabalden. Assemblymember Chen. Commissioner Garcetti.
Aye.
Commissioner Hernandez.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson. Commissioner Miller. Senator Nilo.
Aye.
Assemblymember Ortega, Commissioner Sidley. So that motion passes, Mr. Chairman. Then if you would like me to return to the roll on the first motion. So here, Commissioner Hernandez, the motion was to adopt the draft report on state contracting with nonprofits as contained in the packet beginning at page 23. So on that motion to adopt that report, Commissioner Hernandez.
Aye.
So that report is adopted, Mr. Chairman, and we will format that and release it as shortly as we can.
Very efficient way to operate, commissioners. Much appreciated. Thank you. So, go ahead. Next item. If there's any.
Mr. Chairman, that is really the final item. We have no real administrative update at this time. And so I think we've concluded the agenda. The next meeting is December 11th. I'll note for commissioners, that's an unusual date, but due to the holidays, December 11th. That will also be at 2 p.m. and that will be the second hearing on data centers and electricity policy.
Yep. I want to thank everybody for their participation today. Clearly, this, what we're learning is this issue with
amazing.
AI in the centers is not just, four walls and some computers.
Yeah.
There's a fair, there are lots and lots and lots of subtle issues, lots of areas that are impacted by the whole notion. And I think that I want to again thank staff for putting together the witnesses and also for the background memo. And as I said before, I would encourage any member of the public to go to the Little Hoover Commission website, access that agenda, and you're going to get, essentially, 10 years worth of academic review in the form of memo and backup documentation. And the same as goes for our report on the contracting with nonprofits. We're very fortunate to have the kind of staff that we have. And Jenna, just so you know, that's what we're doing here. Welcome again. So thanks, everybody. See you on the next meeting,
December 11th.
Adios.